Hello, welcome back. I'm Jeff Byers. I'm the instructor for ANI 150, Introduction to 3D Modeling and Game Art. So we are now in Module 2. We're going to be texturing, rendering, and presenting the food can. Wow. So we've got this high poly model completely finished, and now we're ready to texture the low poly. So the idea now is that we have a high poly that's completely finished, and we smoothed it. And we've got a low poly somewhere in here. There's that little guy. Let's go ahead. I'm going to do Control 1 to isolate it so you guys can see it in all its glory. Wow. Not much to see here. But the idea is that we are going to take, I'm going to hit Control 1 again so we can see everything again. We're going to take the high poly information, all that beautiful detail you see on the top and the rim and everything else around. We're gonna bake it into the low poly. So the idea is that we still have to use this, but we're not going to use it for texturing. That means we're not going to use it for texturing. We're going to use it to bake a normal map and use all the intricacies, all the information from this to bake other maps as well. So I know it may be a little confusing right now, but let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to get you all prepped up to get ready for texturing. So again, you have to understand that we're not going to texture the high poly, we're going to texture the low poly. Okay? It'll become more clear as I move forward. Alright, so what we want to do is we want to make sure both of them are occupying the same space, and right now they're not. One is taller than the other one. How do we change that? Well, let's go to the side view. The low poly looks like it's correct in height. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the background, and then what I'm going to really concentrate on is getting this the high res to be the same size. Okay, that's what's important. So the first thing is that I had to do, and I did it before I started the video, is to move the pivot point. So how do we move pivot points? Okay, so it was, let's say it was right there. Let me go ahead and get it where it was before. In here you'll see that under modeling, poly modeling, under the shelf, you can see that I've got this guy right here, which is center pivot. Let's say this is where the pivot point was. Well, if I wanted to go ahead and just scale this up, and it was the pivot points at the center, it's going to scale up and down at the same time. I don't want to do that. I want to move that pivot point down to the bottom. Let me show you why. So if I do non-scale, you can see not only is the top moving up, but the bottom is too, so that causes problems with the bottom of the can. So I just want the height to be moved up, not down. So I have to move that pivot point down to the bottom, so when I do scale it, it only scales up, okay? Not down too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit the W key, and I'm going to hold down the D key, as in David, and I'm going to click on this and move it down. Now, you can see it snapping. Well, you need to turn on the snap tool up here. Okay, right under Edit Mesh, up here at the top, the main menu bar, right underneath there, is this little icon that looks like a magnet and some like grid marks. Click on that and hold the D key down, D as in David, and then click on the arrow and go ahead and snap it to the bottom. Like that. And then let go of the D key, and then what you want to do is you want to go ahead and hit the R key, which is scale, and you don't want to scale from the bottom here because that'll scale everything up and out. You want to just scale non-uniform, which is this guy up here, and just move it up so slightly, like that. Okay. Now see how it does have a snap value. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get kind of where I want it. Okay. And you can see up here, it's a little too tall, right? Okay. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to type in at the very end of this, instead of 44, I'm just going to type in 40. Now you may have to do something different. I don't know. So now you can see that we're just about right at the top. So you'll have to find the number that works for you, right? And then continue doing that until you get it just right. So they have to be occupying the same space for the baking of the maps to work, for the maps that we bake from the high poly to the low poly, will bake efficiently and correctly with no errors. So that's hard to do. You have to have them occupying the exact same space. Okay, now that that's done, we do want to put the pivot point back in the center for both. So I'm just going to marquee select both of them. Okay, you can see what I'm doing. Left mouse button down, marquee select over it. And then we want to go up in here right under poly modeling. Okay, and we're going to go click on this guy right here, which center pivots everything. And then what we're going to do is we're going to delete the history, which deletes all of that history. This guy right here is delete by type history. And then freeze transformations. That's really helpful too. So if I do all of those things, so center pivot, delete by type history, and freeze transformations, now your model is ready to go. Okay, it's ready to be the UVs laid out and all that. So let's talk about laying out UVs. Okay, now in Module 2, you went through quite a few lectures. Okay, one was a lecture on what is texturing, and we talked about texturing. It's basically taking a 3D object and laying it flat in 2 dimensions. Okay, so how do you look at that? Well, we're in 3D view. We're not in a 2D view. Well, if I go to the side view, front view, can I do it that way? No, there's a specific viewport that you have to look at texturing and how it lays things out, and that's called the UV editor. Okay, that is a perfect place for us to UV map our texture or our 3D object. So let's go into UV editor, and this comes with the toolkit. That's basically all the tools we need to lay out UVs. Now right now Maya has no idea what to do with this low poly. Okay, now if you look at this, we see a 2D view. Okay, alright, so we basically see U and V's. Okay, so that's where UVs come from. Alright, so U and V, UV. Okay, so the UVs basically start from 0 all the way to 1, 0 to 1, and that's the UV space. Okay, so what happens is that if you were to look at this, the computer sees it at, it says right now at 0.3, goes from 0 to 0.1 all the way up to 1. You can see that it kind of goes by grid marks. Okay, right? And you can see that 0.1, this spot right here, and 0.5, basically Maya sees those as a coordinate system for UVs. Okay, and the way UVs work is that you lay them out within this space, and you can bring them into Photoshop or Substance Painter. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do both. We're going to bring in the Photoshop and Substance Painter and create a UV map that will then lay back around a 3D object. Okay, so that's the whole idea behind UV mapping, is that you have to lay out the UVs first before your texture looks right, and you have to lay them out in 2D first to get them laid out nicely. Okay, that's why they call it layout. And then you got to pack them back in. And I'll talk more about that as we go through. Okay. On top of that, we learned not only about UVs, that without texture maps, your models look kind of flat, right? Look at that. Wow, it looks like a cylinder. Big deal, right? So the idea here is to make your models look better with textures. And without the textures, I've even seen beautiful models just aren't quite as good as they could be with the texture on. And I think we could all agree with that texturing does make your models look better. Alright, so after you learned about what UV mapping is and what the UV texture editor is, a UV editor is, up here, UV editor, and laying out UVs, then you go back into, once you get to lay out UVs, then you got to learn about what are the textures you can put on them. And we learned a little more about PBR, which is physically based rendering. You watch those videos telling you the different kinds of maps, like color map would be a diffuse map or an albedo map, and then you have your bump map or your normal maps that push and pull what looks like depth, but it's basically fooling you with tricky little lighting. But then there's the height map, which actually pushes and pulls vertices. And then you've got your roughness map and your metallic map. So PBR materials are a lot more realistic than the old school specular, the specular method, which just kind of guesses about how light will react to the surface, and you have to guess what it looks like, and by looking at a real object and going into the software trying to replicate that by looking at something. And with PBR, it's a lot more accurate and precise, and you don't have, it's not a guessing game anymore. Programs like Substance Painter allows you to get photorealistically accurate to exactly what it would look like in real life, the material, and you don't have to, there's no guesswork, which is great for the artist, because then we can really think about creating our art and not worrying about how to make our textures look realistic. So that's PBR. And then UDIM and UDIM tiling video you had to watch. This is the newest thing in as far as you laying out UVs. And I'm going to take you through the old school way and then quickly move you into what I want you to do, which is UDIM tiling and using UDIMs. And then I take you through basics on lighting. So that's stuff to look forward to, and then rendering. And then we're finished with module 2. So what are we looking at now? We're basically looking at just laying the UVs out, which are fairly easy for a cylinder. It's nothing really tricky. And you're probably asking yourself, what about the high poly? Well, again, the high poly is just used for one thing. It's used for helping you bake that information, that detail you could not put in to the low poly. Okay, that's the high poly. It's used like one time, and you can show it off to your family and friends and go, wow, doesn't that look cool? Looks like a can. But the thing is, this is what the finished object's going to look like with the textures on. So we have to get that exactly right. Okay, so there are some things we need to do to prep this properly. There's a couple more issues or things we may want to create and add to this object so we can get the textures on properly. And to do that, we're going to have to go into the high poly and get that up and running, and then we're going to work on the low poly. So in the layers, I want you to click both of those on, okay? And they're occupying the same space, so it might be hard to select them. And if you have a hard time selecting things, just go to Windows and go to the outliner, and you can see your objects in here as well. Okay? And you may want to rename those something different so you know which one is which. Okay? So I could probably rename this food can underscore high for high resolution. And I could rename this guy right here food can low, right? Cool. And I keep that open, so if I do have an issue trying to select them, I can select them this way too as well. So just remember that. So let's go to low poly can, and let's go to the side view, or the front view, that is. And what we're going to do is, it looks like the can label goes all the way up to the rim. So let's take a look and make sure. So I'm going to turn my food can back on, my reference. We're getting right in there, and you can see that it is, because you can see the lip right there, and you can see the bottom, that it goes right to the edge. Okay? Alright, so we're going to actually go in here and add an edge loop right to where that rim is for the high poly. You can see that high poly. We need to find that part, okay? And then cut. Okay, so I'm going to hold down the shift key, my right mouse button, go to insert edge loop tool, and we're going to insert an edge loop right where that edge is right there. Okay? That's important. Okay? It really is. So let's go in here, and we're going to do the same thing for the bottom. Again, we're going to find that edge. You can see it right there. I can see it coming out right there. And so I'm done. Let's hit the Q key. Alright, and all prep work is done. The last thing, again, we've already renamed them, so we're good there. Okay, so there's our little edges. Okay, and so with our low poly, we're going to concentrate on that now. So let's go ahead and turn off that. We don't need that reference anymore. We don't need the high poly anymore. We just need this. So what we're going to do with this now is a couple things. So with this, we're going to break this up into two types of textures, right? As far as materials go. And if you look at the food can, you have two materials going on right now, two basic materials. Now in class, in a live classroom, face to face, I would say, which two materials am I talking about? Well, since it's online, I'm just going to have to say it, and maybe you can say it out loud, and I wouldn't know it. But if we break this down to two, it's going to be the metal, that's the material, right? The metal, and the label, which is paper, and it's pasted on there. And the thing is, if you think about it, all texturing is, and laying out UVs, is the fact of, if I could cut that can down the middle and then basically uncurl it and lay it flat, what would it look like? Okay, well, let's take a look. So if I took this can and split it in half and did exactly what I said I should do, it would look something like this. Let me show you. So if I go in here and I select this can and I go to UV and I go to automatic, right? Automatic. And I'm going to go in here to just go ahead and reset the settings. Hit reset. And I think everything's just perfect, right? I think we're good. Just click on project, right? And then you get these really wild, like, little squares all around it. And what that is that's basically 6 cameras, okay? 6 cameras taking a picture of this object from the top, the bottom, the front, back, and side to side. So that's what an automatic map is. It's just taking pictures of that object from this point of view, okay? And this point of view, and then of course that point of view, and all 6 different sides. So that's okay, right? Let's take a look at what it did in the UV editor, okay? So now we're going to go in here. Let's go ahead and reset this. All right. Click on it, and let's go back to UV editor. There it is. And you notice that I had to update or re-update it for it to see it. If that happens to you, just click off, turn the UV editor. Sometimes it gets stuck. Don't ask me why. But sometimes it gets stuck and you just have to click off and then click back on it and then reopen the UV editor, so it gets kind of stuck. So this is what it did. It laid out the UVs. It's no longer a 3D object. Now it's been laid out. So basically the camera caught these. So if I right click over it and go to shell, you can see that each one of these are now a shell, okay? You're going to be mainly working, if you right click over the object, in shells, okay? What that does, if you click on a shell, you can hit the W key. That's really cool. You can move it. Now notice I've got my snap still on, so I need to turn that off because that will play havoc with this. So let's turn that off up above, right underneath the main menu bar. Click off of that. Okay, that's grid snap is on. Let's turn it off, and now you can move it nice and smoothly. There we go. So the idea in the UV editors, you're able to lay out UVs in a flat area, so we could use a paint program or a program like Substance Painter that recognizes what UV texture space is, okay, and uses it to its best abilities. Which in Substance Painter we can paint in 3D, and I think you can do that in Photoshop now, but I got Painter and I don't really need Photoshop. So basically all I do is I bring everything in Painter and I finish everything up in Photoshop if I need to, okay? Like adding a label. It's very difficult to add a label all the way around an object in Substance Painter. I'm not saying you can't do it, but I'm just saying that it's a little more difficult than just putting a label in Photoshop. in, and that's super easy. So anyway, with that said, we got our first layout, and notice that Maya did a pretty good job of laying it out. But it broke that can up into smaller pieces, as you can see. And that's not really something we want, okay? So what I need to do is sew those together, okay? So I'm going to move those out. This is called unpacking. So we're going to unpack first, okay? And we're going to figure out what we need to do to get this all sewn together, because right now there's seams all over the place. Let me show you what those look like. All right, there's a way to show seams. So we've got our seams, okay? So these are our seams right here. Now the idea about gaming is that we don't want to see seams. What does that mean? That means that these seams can break things up. So if I have the word broth, as you can see on the can, and there's a seam right there, then it's going to break that up, and you're going to see that seam, and it's going to look ugly, okay? So it could be separated, like broth would be separated, and the chicken would be separated right there. And you would notice, and that would be called seeing a seam. You would be seeing it. Seeing a seam basically means that in gaming or any other like film, we don't want to see those seams. We want the seams to be invisible, or you have to have some seams, so you would put it in the back so the camera would never see it. That's what I'm talking about. You don't want seams all over the place, especially with gaming, game models and film models the same. So you really don't want to just let Maya do it for you, because that's what we did. You want to get started with Maya, and then you need to sew the seams together. So what I'm going to do is to sew a seam together to get these all together. And we have to have a seam, though. It's going to be in the back. We got to find out where the seam is in the back, okay? So if we're in the front here, then the back is over here, okay? It's right there. So the seam's not even in the right spot. Well, we'll take care of that later. It's not a problem. So what I'm going to do is I need to find out how we get these together. And sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it's hard. So I'm going to zoom in by, I'm just moving my middle mouse button in and out with my middle finger, and just moving it in and out. Try that, move it in and out with your middle finger. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click over and go to edge, and I'm going to click on that edge. Now notice that edge lights up. So when I click on this edge, that's telling me these two edges should be together. Okay, and the question is this upside down? It has to be. So if I right click over here and go to UVs, I can select the top, and we're going to see on the can where those UVs are. Oh, not good. So let me basically I need to go in and turn that food can off because it's in my way. And unfortunately I lost my UV map, or my UV editor here. It went up here again. So the idea here is that is upside down. So how do I get it back up again, around? Okay, this is where the toolkit comes in. Okay, so you can see that if these UVs should be facing down, then how do I do that? Well, there's two ways. You can marquee select all of them, or marquee select UV shell. Okay, and if I click the UV shell, I can rotate it under transform. Okay, and I can rotate it this way under tools. So transform, think about move, scale, rotate, and then scroll down, and you can see that we've got these little icons that allow you to rotate. So I'm going to rotate it this way and this way twice. Now I'm going to go back in here, go to edge mode, click on the edge again, and look at that, they're showing up. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to select all the edges, okay, on the side here. Zoom in and then click on those. So we have 3 edges. You can see that they're all highlighting on this side too. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to cut and sew on the UV editor and go to move and sew. And it puts those two together with no seam at all. So now we're actually fixing all those seams that you see. Okay? Alright. So let's continue like this. Okay, this one is fine. This one's actually working okay. So I'm just going to move in, click on that one, zoom out, and go down, zoom in again, and click on that one. And then you can see that I'm going to go in here to what? Cut and sew, and move and sew. There we go. Oh, we're getting real close now. Is this one? Yeah, we got lucky again. We don't have to rotate that. So hold down the shift key and zoom out and select this guy right here, and then we can go ahead and go to cut sew and move and sew. There we go. Perfect. All right, fantastic. So now you can see that we only have one seam. It's not where we want it, but we only have one seam on the can, which is great. So we've almost got it fixed. A couple more things we need to fix. Let's get back again. All right, so where is the back? So the only way to find out where the back is, bear with me here, I've got all these screens in here. Click on the background, and you notice that the seam needs to be back here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get started by clicking on that edge. Okay, clicking on that edge, and there it is. There's that edge. You can see the edge. I'm going to hit the Q key so you don't see that move tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on, hold the shift key down and click on that little edge right there at the top and then at the bottom. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to cut that. So cut and sew, and we're going to cut. That will separate that line into two pieces. So I'm going to cut, and what I'm going to do is, it doesn't look like anything happened, but I'm going to right click over this and go to shell. I'm going to click on the shell and I'm going to move it over. Look at that. Okay, that is going to be our seam. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to this other side and click on the edge here. Okay, very easy. Click on that edge on this side and shift select the top little piece, little edge, and the bottom little edge. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go to cut and sew, move and sew. And when we do that, notice that now the seam is in the back. Now if you don't see these white lines, you need to turn this on. Okay, it's the little icon right here. Okay, alright. And we'll talk more about these icons a little bit later. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to go ahead and take a break. We're almost 30 minutes in already, believe it or not. So what I want you guys to do is save your work. Okay, save your scene, and just call this something like UV mapping. Let's go to 6 on this and go, let's see, 06. UV mapping. Okay. Alright, something like that. And then in the next part, we'll come back and we'll continue with this video series on how to now fix all this if it needs to be fixed, which it does, and how to pack it back up again. Okay, so I'm going to stop and I'll see you in the next video.